the sterile corridors of Israel's most secure translation facility, Maya Cohen sat across from her supervisors, her hands trembling as she held evidence that would either save her career or destroy it forever. For 3 weeks, she had been translating intercepted communications from a terrorist cell, and what she discovered didn't match the official narrative her superiors wanted to hear. When she refused to alter her translations, they branded her a liar, stripped her credentials, and escorted her from the building. But Maya had made copies. Every word, every phrase, every threat she'd accurately conveyed. Now, as a devastating attack loomed on the horizon, she had 72 hours to prove that the lies weren't hers, but theirs, and that the truth she'd been fired for telling was the only thing standing between her country and catastrophe. Maya Cohen had been translating Arabic intercepts for Israeli intelligence for 7 years, and she prided herself on one fundamental principle: absolute accuracy. In a world where a single misplaced word could mean the difference between a successful operation and international catastrophe, she treated every syllable with surgical precision. Her colleagues called her obsessive, her supervisors called her invaluable. That was before the afternoon of October 12th, when everything she had built came crashing down around her. The audio file arrived in her queue at 2:47 p.m., marked with the highest priority designation she'd ever seen. The metadata indicated it had been intercepted from a cell phone in Gaza, part of ongoing surveillance of a group Israeli intelligence had been monitoring for months. Maya plugged in her headphones, opened her translation software, and hit play. The voices were clear, speaking in a Palestinian dialect she knew intimately from years of study and fieldwork. 2 men were discussing logistics, speaking in the careful, coded language that operatives use when they know they might be monitored but need to communicate anyway. As Maya listened, her fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing every nuance, every contextual clue. The men were discussing a shipment. That much was obvious from the surface level. But as she dug deeper into the idiomatic expressions and cultural references, a more sinister picture emerged. They weren't discussing weapons or explosives in the conventional sense. The coded language pointed to something far more sophisticated, a cyber attack, timed to coincide with a physical assault. The target, based on geographical references and timeline discussions, appeared to be a desalination plant on Israel's northern coast, critical infrastructure that provided water to millions of people. Maya's heart raced as she completed her translation. This wasn't just another routine intercept. If her interpretation was correct, they were looking at a coordinated attack that could cripple civilian infrastructure while simultaneously launching a physical assault. She double-checked every phrase, consulted reference materials, and verified her interpretation of the coded language against known patterns from previous intercepts. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. She saved her work, flagged it as urgent, and sent it up the chain of command. The response came within an hour, but it wasn't what she expected. Her supervisor, David Ashkenazi, appeared at her workstation with 2 other senior analysts she'd never worked with before. His face was stern, his body language defensive. "We need to discuss your translation," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. They moved to a conference room, and Maya felt the first stirrings of unease as the door closed behind them. What followed was 2 hours of the most intense professional interrogation of her career. They went through her translation line by line, questioning her interpretations, challenging her understanding of context, suggesting alternative meanings for phrases she knew she'd translated correctly. The desalination plant, they insisted, wasn't the target. The timing she'd identified was wrong. The level of coordination she'd described was implausible. They had other intelligence, they told her, that contradicted her assessment. The group being monitored was focused on a completely different objective, a minor military outpost, not civilian infrastructure. Maya defended her work with evidence and expertise. She pulled up previous intercepts from the same group, showed patterns in their coded language, demonstrated how the timeline matched known operational patterns. But with each piece of evidence she presented, her supervisors grew more dismissive. Finally, David leaned across the table and said the words that would haunt her for weeks to come. "Maya, I need you to revise this translation. Your interpretation is creating unnecessary alarm and could derail ongoing operations based on more reliable intelligence. The request hung in the air between them like poison gas. Maya understood immediately what was being asked. They didn't want her to correct errors or refine ambiguities. They wanted her to change her professional assessment to match a predetermined conclusion. She thought of her 7 years of service, her spotless record, her reputation for accuracy. Then she thought of the millions of people whose water supply could be contaminated or cut off if her translation was correct and ignored. "I won't do it," she said quietly. "My translation is accurate. If you have contradicting intelligence, that's a question for analysts to reconcile, not for me to resolve by falsifying my work." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. David's face hardened into a mask of bureaucratic fury. "Then you're refusing a direct order from your supervisor to review and correct your work?" "I'm refusing to lie in an official translation," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Show me where my translation is inaccurate and I'll correct it. Ask me to change what was actually said, and the answer is no." Within 48 hours, Maya was summoned to a formal review board. The charges were vague but devastating: gross misinterpretation of source material, insubordination, and most damaging of all, fabricating intelligence for personal or political purposes. She was given no opportunity to defend herself, no chance to present her evidence to anyone outside the immediate chain of command that had already decided her guilt. Her security clearance was suspended, her access to the facility revoked, and she was placed on immediate administrative leave pending further investigation. They escorted her from the building on a Friday afternoon, past colleagues who averted their eyes, through corridors where she'd walked with pride for 7 years, and out into the Jerusalem sunshine that suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. In her bag, she carried only personal items, except for one small flash drive hidden in a folded handkerchief, containing copies of every file related to her translation. She'd made the copies 3 days earlier, when she first sensed which way the wind was blowing, knowing that in the intelligence world, the only protection was documentation. As Maya stood outside the security gate, watching her former workplace recede into the distance, she made a decision. If they were going to destroy her career for telling the truth, she would make sure that truth survived, whatever the cost. The first week after her dismissal, Maya lived in a fog of disbelief and anger. She spent hours at her apartment in Tel Aviv, reviewing her copies of the intercepts, checking and rechecking her translations, searching for any error that might justify what had happened to her. She found none. Every interpretation stood up to scrutiny. Every contextual judgment was supported by established patterns and linguistic evidence. The more she reviewed her work, the more convinced she became that something deeper was happening, something that went far beyond a simple disagreement over translation methodology. On the 8th day, Maya's phone rang with a blocked number. When she answered, a woman's voice, speaking Hebrew with a slight American accent, said simply, "You were right about the desalination plant. Meet me at Café Tamar in 2 hours. Come alone." The line went dead before Maya could respond. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, a setup to catch her with classified materials or to build a case for prosecution. But another instinct, the one that had made her an exceptional translator, told her this was real. Café Tamar was a small, perpetually crowded establishment in a busy shopping district, the kind of place where 2 people could meet without attracting attention, where conversations were lost in the ambient noise of espresso machines and chattering customers. Maya arrived early, selected a table with clear sight lines to the entrance, and waited. The woman who approached 15 minutes later was in her mid-40s, dressed in business casual, carrying a leather portfolio that was expensive but not ostentatious. She sat down without introduction and slid a manila folder across the table. "Don't open it here," the woman said quietly. "My name is Rachel Hirsch. I work in a different division than you did, one that actually listens when translators raise red flags. Your translation landed on my desk 3 days after you were fired. The official version that replaced it is garbage, and everyone in my unit knows it." Maya's hands trembled as she touched the folder. "Why are you helping me?" Rachel's smile was grim. Because in 2 weeks there's going to be a major security conference at the Haifa Convention Center. Half the cabinet will be there, plus international guests. The desalination plant you identified. It provides water to the entire region, including the convention center. If your translation is accurate, and I believe it is, that conference is going to be hit hard, and the official intelligence community is looking in completely the wrong direction. Over the next hour, Rachel explained the political dynamics that had led to Maya's dismissal. A powerful faction within the intelligence services had been pushing a narrative about the terrorist group in question, that they were diminished, fractured, focused only on small-scale harassment operations. This narrative supported ongoing peace negotiations and justified reduced security spending in certain areas. Maya's translation contradicted that comfortable story, suggesting the group was far more capable and ambitious than anyone wanted to admit. Rather than adjusting their assessment to fit the evidence, decision-makers had chosen to suppress the evidence. "I need you to meet someone," Rachel said, pulling out her phone. "Moshe Dayan, no relation to the famous general. He's former Mossad, now works as an independent security consultant. He has connections everywhere, and more importantly, he has a reputation for not giving a damn about political convenience. If anyone can get your information to people who'll actually act on it, it's him." The meeting with Moshe Dayan took place the following evening in a private dining room at a restaurant in Old Jaffa. Dayan was a compact man in his 60s, with grey hair and the kind of alert, assessing eyes that seemed to record and catalogue everything. He listened without interruption as Maya walked through her translation, her evidence, and the circumstances of her dismissal. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, then asked a single question. "Can you prove the translation they're using now is wrong?" Maya opened her laptop and pulled up a comparative analysis she'd prepared. Side by side, she displayed her translation and the sanitized version that had replaced it. The differences were stark. Where she had identified specific geographical references that pointed to the desalination plant, the official version interpreted them as vague directional indicators. Where she had caught temporal markers indicating a 2-week timeline, the official version suggested an indefinite future action. Most damningly, where her translation identified coordination between cyber and physical attack elements, the official version described them as separate, unrelated conversations. "This isn't a difference of interpretation," Moshe said, his voice hard. "This is deliberate falsification. Someone decided what they wanted the intelligence to say and made the translation fit." He closed the laptop and looked at Maya with an expression somewhere between respect and pity. "You understand what you're up against. The people who did this have resources, authority, and a strong motivation to make sure you're discredited. Going forward with this will make you enemies at the highest levels." "They already fired me," Maya replied. "What more can they do?" Moshe's laugh was bitter. "Oh, my dear, they've barely started. But if you're willing to risk it, I know someone in the Prime Minister's security detail who owes me more favors than he can count. I can get your evidence in front of him. Whether he acts on it is another question." Over the next 3 days, Moshe worked his network while Maya provided additional documentation. She created detailed linguistic analyses showing why her interpretation was correct, compiled reference materials demonstrating the coded language patterns she'd identified, and even located a linguistics professor at Hebrew University who was willing to review her work. The professor's assessment was unequivocal. Maya's translation was not only accurate but represented the kind of thorough, contextually aware analysis that was the gold standard of intelligence work. But even as they built their case, Maya became aware that she was being followed. The surveillance was sometimes subtle, a car that appeared in her rearview mirror too often, a man reading a newspaper on the same bus she took every day. Other times, it was blatant, almost as if someone wanted her to know she was being watched. Her phone developed strange clicking sounds during calls. Her internet connection showed suspicious activity. She was living in a paranoid's nightmare, except the paranoia was entirely justified. Then, 10 days after her first meeting with Rachel, Maya's apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken. Her television, laptop, and jewelry were all untouched. But her desk had been searched, drawers left slightly ajar, papers disturbed in a way that suggested someone had been looking for specific documents. The flash drive with her copies was safe, She'd learned enough from spy novels to keep it hidden in a hollowed-out book on her shelf, but the message was clear. They knew what she had, and they wanted it. That night, Maya sat in her ransacked apartment and made a decision. She couldn't wait for official channels to vindicate her. If the attack was coming in less than a week, as she believed, then she needed to force the issue. She called Moshe and told him to set up the meeting with the Prime Minister's security detail, regardless of whether they'd completed their documentation. "We're out of time," she said. "Either they listen now, or people are going to die." The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon at a secure location, a private office in a government building that Maya wasn't told the name of until she arrived. Present were Moshe, Rachel, Maya, and 3 men in dark suits who introduced themselves only by first names: Avi, Yaron, and Chen. They represented, Moshe whispered, the absolute inner circle of national security decision-making, the people who briefed the Prime Minister every morning on threats and operations. Maya presented her case for 90 minutes, walking through every element of her translation, every piece of supporting evidence, every flaw in the official version that had replaced her work. The 3 men asked sharp, probing questions, but Maya could tell they were actually listening, actually engaging with the substance rather than dismissing her out of hand. When she finished, Avi, who appeared to be the senior member of the group, asked one final question. "If you're right, and the attack is targeting the desalination plant during the security conference, what would be the potential casualties?" Maya had prepared for this question. Direct casualties from the physical attack, assuming they use the explosives we believe they've acquired, potentially hundreds if the conference is in session. Casualties from water supply contamination or disruption, impossible to calculate, but we're talking about the primary water source for nearly 1 million people. This isn't just an attack, it's an attempt to create a humanitarian crisis. The room fell silent. Chen, the youngest of the 3, looked at his colleagues and said what everyone was thinking. "If she's right, and we do nothing, this is going to be worse than anything we've faced in a decade. If she's wrong, we've ramped up security and wasted some resources. That's not a difficult risk calculation." "Except there's a political component," Yaron replied, his voice weary. "The people who fired her are going to fight any attempt to act on this intelligence. They've staked their credibility on their version being correct. Admitting she was right means admitting they were wrong, or worse, that they deliberately suppressed accurate intelligence for political reasons." Avi stood and walked to the window, looking out over Jerusalem. After a long moment, he turned back to the group. "I don't care about internal politics when we're talking about potential mass casualties. I'm taking this to the Prime Minister tonight. Maya, I need you to be prepared to brief him directly tomorrow morning. Moshe, Rachel, you're both vouching for her credibility, so you'll be there too. And Maya," he looked at her with an expression of grim respect, "whatever happens after this, you've done your job with integrity. That matters more than these people realize." The Prime Minister's briefing room was smaller than Maya had imagined, dominated by a large conference table and wall-mounted screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds. Prime Minister Goldstein was a man in his early 60s, with the kind of focused intensity that came from decades in both military and political leadership. He listened to Maya's presentation without interruption, occasionally making notes, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When she finished, he asked her to step outside while he conferred with his security advisors. Maya waited in an anteroom with Moshe and Rachel for 45 minutes that felt like days. Finally, they were called back in. Goldstein looked directly at Maya and said, "I've ordered immediate heightened security around the desalination facility and the convention center. I've also authorized a raid on the cell we believe is planning this attack, based on the geographical and temporal markers you identified. This operation launches in 6 hours. He paused, and his expression softened slightly. "I've also ordered a full internal investigation into how and why your translation was suppressed. If your analysis proves correct, and my advisors believe it will, There will be consequences for those who prioritized political convenience over national security. You have my personal apology for how you were treated. The raid happened at 3:00 a.m. the next morning. Israeli special forces hit 3 locations simultaneously: a safe house in Gaza, a warehouse near the Lebanese border, and an apartment in East Jerusalem. What they found vindicated everything Maya had translated. At the warehouse, they discovered explosives packed into vehicles marked with utility company logos, vehicles that would have had easy access to the desalination plant. At the apartment, they found detailed plans of the facility, including security protocols and shift schedules. Most chilling of all, at the safe house, they recovered computer equipment containing malware specifically designed to attack the plant's water treatment control systems. But the operation wasn't without cost. 3 operatives from the terrorist cell escaped during the raid on the safe house, disappearing into Gaza's labyrinthine tunnels. The cyber attack component, while neutralized, had already been partially deployed. Dormant code had been inserted into contractor systems months earlier, waiting for activation. It took Israeli cybersecurity teams 72 hours of intensive work to locate and remove all traces of the malware. The security conference was postponed, then relocated to a facility with multiple redundant security measures. The desalination plant underwent a complete security overhaul, and Maya Cohen, the translator who had been fired for telling the truth, found herself at the center of a media storm she had never wanted. The internal investigation moved quickly once political will was behind it. It emerged that David Ashkenazi, Maya's former supervisor, had been under pressure from senior officials who were committed to a specific narrative about the terrorist group's capabilities. These officials, in turn, had been influenced by diplomatic considerations and budget battles that had nothing to do with actual intelligence. The decision to suppress Maya's translation hadn't been a conspiracy in the traditional sense. No one had explicitly ordered the truth to be buried. Instead, it was the result of multiple people making prudent decisions to avoid rocking the boat, each assuming someone else had verified the alternative interpretation, none willing to challenge the institutional momentum toward a preferred conclusion. David was quietly reassigned to a non-translation role. 2 senior officials took early retirement. The diplomatic initiatives they had been protecting collapsed anyway, undermined by the very attack that had nearly succeeded. And the intelligence community implemented new protocols designed to protect analysts and translators from political pressure, protocols that cynics noted would probably be circumvented the next time convenience clashed with truth. 3 weeks after the raid, Maya received an unexpected visitor at the new apartment she'd moved to after the break-in. It was one of the men who had escaped during the initial operation, now in Israeli custody after being captured trying to cross back into Gaza. The Shin Bet allowed her to observe his interrogation from behind one-way glass. When asked why they had targeted the desalination plant, he explained, through an interpreter, that they wanted to demonstrate Israel's vulnerability, to show that even critical infrastructure could be attacked. Maya listened to the interpreter, a colleague from her former department, render the terrorists' words into Hebrew. The translation was accurate, professional, and utterly straightforward. This, she thought, was how the system was supposed to work. Facts conveyed honestly, no matter how uncomfortable, allowing decision-makers to act on reality rather than wishful thinking. She returned to work a month after the raid, not to her old position, but to a newly created role in a reformed section dedicated to translation quality and integrity. Her job was to review high-priority intercepts and ensure that translations were being done without political interference. It was, everyone acknowledged, a direct response to what had happened, a bureaucratic way of saying, "We're sorry," and "We'll do better." Whether it would actually prevent future instances of truth being suppressed for convenience remained to be seen. On a cool November evening, 6 months after her firing, Maya stood on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. The desalination plant was visible in the distance, its lights twinkling against the darkening sky, its processed water flowing to millions of people who would never know how close they had come to catastrophe. She thought about the 72 hours between her dismissal and her vindication, about the choice she had made to fight rather than accept the injustice quietly. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Drinks tonight? Moshe wants to celebrate. Apparently, our little adventure inspired a novel he's writing." Maya smiled. The idea of Moshe, the hardened former Mossad operative, writing fiction was almost as improbable as everything else that had happened. But as she prepared to meet her friends, Maya reflected on a truth she had learned through her ordeal. In the intelligence world, the greatest danger often wasn't the enemy you were monitoring, but the willingness of good people to accept comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. Her translation had been accurate all along. The real fabrication had been the institutional consensus that reality could be wished away by changing the words used to describe it. She had been fired for refusing to participate in that fabrication, but in the end, the truth she had insisted on, despite the personal cost, had saved lives. It was vindication of a sort, though Maya knew better than to assume it meant the system had fundamentally changed. There would be other translators facing similar pressures, other truths that powerful people would prefer to suppress. All she could do was hope that her example might give them the courage to stand firm when their own moment came. As she locked her apartment and headed out into the Jerusalem night, Maya carried with her a quiet pride in the simple act of doing her job with integrity. In a world of intelligence agencies and geopolitical maneuvering, of terrorists and counter-terrorists, sometimes the most powerful weapon was something utterly ordinary, an honest translation and the courage to defend it. The city lights spread below her as she walked, a million individual stories playing out in apartments and cafes, government offices and secret facilities. Somewhere in those lights, the next crisis was probably already brewing, the next intercept being recorded, the next translator sitting down to render foreign words into Hebrew. Maya hoped they would remember what she had learned, that accuracy and integrity weren't optional extras in intelligence work. They were the foundation everything else was built on. And when institutions forgot that truth, it fell to individuals to remember it for them, whatever the cost.